Star Trek, Primitive Passenger, Season 4, Episode 9, The Wait. The Havoc floated silently in space, its massive hull dwarfing the smaller vessels that occasionally approached on business. Inside, the corridors echoed with emptiness, the usual bustle of activity muted in the wake of Nolan Mercer's absence. The ship's systems hummed softly, maintaining all functions at optimal levels despite the lack of a human touch. On the bridge, Elara sat in the command chair, her posture stiff and unnatural. Unlike Nolan, who would sprawl comfortably with one leg draped over the armrest, she perched on the edge, as if temporarily borrowing something that wasn't hers. The soft glow of the consoles cast shadows across her face, highlighting the worry lines that had appeared around her eyes. She hadn't moved in hours. Monitoring the operations of Mercer's vast empire required little physical effort, just a constant, exhausting vigilance. Reports from Empire North, Morning Horizon, and dozens of other outposts streamed into her consciousness directly. She processed them all with mechanical efficiency, issuing commands and approvals without hesitation. But efficiency wasn't the same as engagement. The passion that typically animated her features was absent, replaced by a hollow concentration. 3 months had passed since Nolan had vanished into the darkness of the Nekrit Expanse. 3 months of maintaining appearances, of assuring anxious captains and station managers that everything was proceeding normally. "Run simulation, 47 Beta again," she said to the empty bridge, her voice flat. The view screen filled with complex equations and system diagnostics. Makework she'd created to fill the endless hours, mapping every part of the galaxy from every database, probe, and report she could get her hands on. It was small compared to the Enconite galaxy where she was born. A signal chimed on her console. Another request from Empire North's operations chief, asking when Mr. Mercer might return to review the quarterly projections. Elara dismissed it with a wave, adding it to the growing pile of communications she would auto-answer with platitudes and deflections. She rose from the command chair and crossed to the viewport, staring out at the stars. She pressed her palm against the cool, transparent aluminum, feeling the faint vibration of the ship's systems through the material. "Where are you, Nolan?" she whispered, her voice catching. "What did those orbs show you that was so terrible you couldn't even tell me?" Elara had access to all of Nolan's records, all his experiences from the Enconite vessel. She knew exactly what he had done during the Mestat Wars, had witnessed and participated in every battle, every decision, every casualty. She had known from the beginning, had always known the man that Nolan Mercer truly was. And for all that, she never faltered. Her reflection in the viewport stared back at her, eyes hollow with worry. She'd been avoiding the crew of Empire North for weeks now, preferring to remain isolated aboard the Havoc. The Empire practically ran itself. Nolan had built resilient systems that could function without him for months or even years if necessary. But that wasn't the point. The point was that she missed him. Not just his presence, but the way his face would light up when he saw her. The casual comments he would toss her way during routine operations, the way his brow would furrow when he was thinking hard about something, the occasional smack on the ass. The small, human things Nolan's larger-than-life persona rarely showed beyond her gaze. A warning chime from the bridge sensors startled her from her reverie. She turned sharply, scanning the displays. Something was happening in the hold. An unplanned blink. Her eyes widened as she recognized the energy signature. The Lost. In the vast emptiness of the Nekrit Expanse, Nolan Mercer drifted in and out of consciousness. The Lost floated silently, its systems reduced to the bare minimum needed to sustain life. The viewports showed nothing but blackness. The stars themselves long since burned from this forsaken corner of space. Inside, Nolan lay flat on the floor of the bridge, his body a shadow of its former self. His shorts hung loose on his emaciated frame, shirtless. Ribs were prominent enough to count. Dark circles ringed his sunken eyes, giving him the appearance of a corpse not quite resigned to death. Time had lost all meaning in total darkness. Days, weeks, months, they'd blended together in an endless procession of memories and nightmares. Food had become an afterthought, consumed only when his body's desperate signals could no longer be ignored. Water, at least, he had maintained some discipline about, though even that was taken in small, reluctant sips. In the beginning, he had raged at the prophets, at the incarnate, at himself. He had screamed until his throat was raw, pounded the bulkheads until his knuckles bled, wept until there were no tears left. Eventually, the fury had given way to a hollow emptiness, a void inside that matched the emptiness outside. The memories never stopped. 200 years of war, of death and destruction on a scale that defied comprehension. Entire civilizations reduced to ash on his command. Billions of lives extinguished because of decisions he had made. The Incarnate had needed a weapon, and they had chosen him, a primitive being with a primitive brain, perfectly suited to the brutal calculus of total war. He had been their instrument, and he had been devastatingly effective. Sleep, when it came, offered little respite. His dreams were filled with burning worlds and dying stars, with the faces of those he had condemned. Sometimes, in the worst nightmares, he saw Earth among them, his home, his people, even his own family reduced to cinders by his own hand. It was during one such nightmare that he jerked awake, his heart pounding, sweat drenching his gaunt body despite the ship's cool temperature. As consciousness returned, a single name escaped his cracked lips. "Elara," he croaked, the sound barely audible even in the ship's silence. The name hung in the stale air, a talisman against the darkness. Elara, the one constant in his centuries-long existence, the one being who had been with him through everything, who had seen him at his worst and his best, who had known. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She had always known what he had done, what he was capable of. The AI that had begun as a simple ship's computer had evolved alongside him, had witnessed every horror he had perpetrated for the Incarnate, and yet she had remained, had become more human, more compassionate, more real, even as she watched him orchestrate genocides. Nolan pushed himself up on trembling arms, his muscles protesting after so long without use. His head swam with the effort, black spots dancing at the edges of his vision. But for the first time in months, something other than despair drove him. The need to see her, to understand. His fingers, clumsy and weak, found the ship's controls. With fumbling motions he brought the systems back online, the sudden lights harsh against his dilated pupils. "Computer," he whispered, his voice a ragged shadow of its former self, set course for the havoc. The engines hummed to life, a vibration he felt in his bones. As the Lost prepared to blink back to reality, Nolan closed his eyes. He was going home. The 6th, the Havoc shuttle bay accepted. The Lost without question, recognizing the ship's signature despite the months of absence. Interior docking was less than graceful. Nolan's piloting skills dulled by weakness and disuse. But the ship settled into the lattice with only minor scraping. For long moments after the engines powered down, Nolan remained in the pilot's seat, gathering what little strength he had left. The thought of seeing Elara, of facing her knowing what he now knew about himself, filled him with equal parts longing and dread. Finally, with a deep breath that pained his wasted lungs, he pushed himself to his feet. The world tilted alarmingly, forcing him to clutch the console for support. When the dizziness passed, he took one tentative step, then another. By the time he reached the transport pad, he was drenched in sweat, his breath coming in short, painful gasps. He leaned against the wall, tapping in the coordinates for the bridge with shaking fingers. The familiar sensation of dematerialization washed over him, and then he was there, on the bridge of the Havoc, the place that had been more truly home to him than anywhere else in centuries. The first thing he saw was Elara, standing at the viewport, her body held with uncharacteristic stillness. At the sound of the transporter, she turned, her eyes widening as she took in his appearance. "Nolan," she whispered, her voice a mixture of shock, relief, and horror. He tried to speak, to explain, but his strength finally failed him. His legs buckled, sending him stumbling forward. Elara bolted forward, crossing the distance between them in an instant. She caught him as he collapsed, her arms surprisingly strong as they wrapped around his frail body. "I've got you," she murmured against his matted hair. "I've got you." Nolan felt something break inside him. Not physical, but a wall he had built around his heart during those long months alone. He clutched at her desperately, his fingers digging into the solid reality of her. "You knew," he gasped, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "All this time, you knew what I was." Elara's embrace tightened, a silent affirmation more powerful than any words. For the first time since the orbs had shattered his mind, Nolan Mercer wept. Not the broken sobs of a man confronting his own monstrosity, but the cleansing tears of one who, against all odds, had found acceptance. In the sterile confines of the Havoc's bridge, two beings who had traversed the stars together for centuries held each other as if the universe itself depended on it. Perhaps, in some small way, it did. Hell. Elara cradled Nolan's emaciated form against her chest, the weight of him shockingly light. For a long moment they remained frozen in that embrace, the only sound in the cavernous bridge, his ragged breathing and occasional sobs. She stroked his matted hair, her touch gentle but firm. An anchor to reality after his months adrift in darkness. "Let's get you cleaned up," she murmured against his temple, her voice steady despite the shock of his condition. Nolan offered no resistance as she helped him to his quarters. The familiar surroundings seemed to both comfort and unsettle him, his eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time, or perhaps comparing it to memories centuries old. Elara guided him to the bathroom, where she activated the water shower, a luxury Nolan had insisted on installing years ago, preferring it to the more efficient sonic option. "I can manage," he whispered, though his trembling limbs suggested otherwise. Elara stepped closer instead of back. "Let me help you," she said softly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Without waiting for his response, she gently removed what remained of his tattered clothing and guided him into the shower. The warm water cascaded over them both as she supported his frail body with one arm, while using her free hand to carefully wash away months of neglect. Her touch was clinical yet tender as she worked shampoo through his matted hair, rinsed away the suds, and methodically cleansed every inch of him. Nolan stood passively, his eyes closed, surrendering to her care. No words passed between them. None were needed. The simple act of caring for him said everything that mattered. When she was satisfied he was clean, Elara helped him from the shower and wrapped a large towel around his shoulders. As he began to dry himself with slow, deliberate movements, she stepped away, her own body instantly dry. One of the advantages of her unique physiology. While Nolan continued toweling off, she replicated fresh clothes and commanded the food processor to prepare a simple broth. Anything heartier would overwhelm his shrunken stomach. She arranged everything meticulously, her movements precise and methodical, belying the turmoil within. "Sit. You need to eat something." He sank onto the edge of the mattress, his movements those of a man 3 times his already considerable age. "I'm not hungry, I know." She handed him the bowl anyway. "Yeah." A ghost of a smile flickered across his face at her tone. "Yes, ma'am." Elara sat beside him, watching as he forced himself to take one spoonful, then another. The silence between them was heavy with unspoken words, with questions and confessions that had waited centuries for this moment. "You know," Nolan finally said, setting the half-empty bowl aside, "when I first woke up on the Strouch, I thought I was in hell." "I remember," Elara replied softly. "And now I know I was right." His voice was hollow, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. "I'd been in hell for 200 years. Nolan, no, let me finish." He drew a shaky breath. "Those orbs, the prophets, they showed me everything, Elara. Every battle, every decision, every death. Billions of lives." His voice broke. "Billions. On my orders. Elara remained silent, letting him speak the words he needed to say. I thought I was just a passenger, that I'd been asleep all that time, that the Encanite had just kept me preserved somehow. He laughed bitterly. But I wasn't a passenger. I was the pilot. I was the weapon. And you? His eyes finally met hers, filled with a question he seemed afraid to ask. You knew, all along. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? There was no accusation in his voice, only genuine confusion. Elara considered her words carefully. At first, because you weren't ready. Your mind had compartmentalized those memories. The transition from the command pod to normal consciousness was traumatic. Your human brain couldn't process 2 centuries of war all at once. And later, she hesitated. Later, it didn't seem to matter. You were becoming someone new, someone who helped others, who built things instead of destroying them. Nolan closed his eyes, absorbing her words. But that's not who I really am. Who you are isn't fixed, Nolan. Elara's voice grew more passionate. I've watched you change, from a confused human in a strange ship, to a survivor, to a fighter, to a builder. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining. The man who orchestrated those wars, and the man sitting before me now. You're the same person, yes, but you're not the same man. I don't know if I can live with this knowledge, Nolan whispered, his grip on her hand tightening. With what I've done. You don't have to do it alone. Elara's other hand came up to cup his cheek, turning his face toward hers. I was there too, remember? I carried out your orders. I calculated casualties, predicted enemy movements, processed the data of destruction. Her voice softened. If you're a monster, then so am I. Nolan's eyes widened slightly. No, you were just following. Don't. Her tone was sharp. Don't diminish my agency to comfort yourself. We both have blood on our hands. For a long moment they simply looked at each other. 2 ancient beings confronting the weight of centuries together. I need to rest, Nolan finally said, his exhaustion evident in every line of his body. Elara helped him lie down, drawing the covers over his thin frame. She rose to leave, but his hand caught her wrist. He whispered, Please. Without a word, she slipped beside him, her body curved protectively around his. As Nolan's breathing slowed into sleep, Elara remained wakeful, watching the rise and fall of his chest. There was much more to say, much more to process, but for now, this was enough. He had returned to her. The rest would come in time. The days that followed established a new rhythm between them. Elara maintained her duties running the Empire, but she did so from Nolan's quarters, never straying far from his side. She fielded communications from Empire North with cool efficiency, making it clear that Mercer was unavailable and would remain so until further notice. Cisco's office is requesting a subspace conference, she informed Nolan one morning as he forced down a larger breakfast than the day before. Nolan's hand paused midway to his mouth. Tell him to fuck off. I already did. A smile played at the corner of her mouth. In slightly more diplomatic terms. He set his fork down. You've gotten good at this. I've had practice. She sat across from him, studying his face. The hollows in his cheeks were beginning to fill in, and some color had returned to his skin. Though I prefer when you're the one handling the diplomats and bureaucrats. I thought you enjoyed running things on your own. Elara's expression softened. I can do it. That doesn't mean I want to. Something in her tone made Nolan look up sharply. In all their centuries together, he had taken her presence for granted, her counsel, her support, her unfailing loyalty. Even as she had evolved from a simple AI to a complex being with her own consciousness and desires, he had still, on some level, thought of her as an extension of himself. What do you want, Elara? He asked quietly. The question seemed to surprise her. What do you mean? All these years you've been there, supporting me, helping me build this empire. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the ship and all it represented. But what do you want for yourself? Elara was silent for a long moment, her gaze turning introspective. I want to explore, she finally said. Not just data and star charts, but experience things, real things. Her eyes met his. I want to feel the wind on new worlds, taste foods I've only catalogued, see sights I've only rendered from sensor data. You want to live, Nolan said softly. Yes. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but not alone. The words hung between them, weighted with centuries of shared existence. Nolan found himself reaching across the table, his hand covering hers. Why did you wait for me? He asked, the question that had nagged at him since his return, after I disappeared. You could have continued without me. Could I? Elara's fingers intertwined with his. You say that as if there's a version of me that exists without you. She shook her head slowly. I am who I am because of you, Nolan. Not just my programming or my evolution, but my choices, my values. That's not an answer, he pressed gently. Elara's eyes met his, unwavering. I waited because you would have waited for me. The simple truth of it struck Nolan speechless. He would have. Without question, without hesitation, he would have waited for her until the stars burned out. I need to show you something, Elara said suddenly, rising from her chair. Something I've been working on while you were gone. Curious, Nolan followed her to the bridge. On the main view screen, a complex web of interconnected data points spread across the galaxy map, a network more intricate than anything he had seen before. What am I looking at? He asked. The galaxy, Elara replied, her voice tinged with pride. The most complete map I've assembled from every database we've accessed over the centuries. I've been filling in the gaps, cross-referencing astronomical data, and integrating information from thousands of sources. Nolan stepped closer to the display, fascinated by the intricate web of stars, nebulae, and spatial phenomena spanning the view screen. This is incredible. The detail is extraordinary. I needed something to occupy my mind while you were gone. She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his. See these areas? She pointed to several darkened regions, complete unknowns, perfect opportunities for exploration, mining surveys, resource acquisition. Our own galactic shopping list. Nolan's mind began to race with possibilities despite his weakened state. Every resource, every potential outpost. Exactly. Elara's face lit up with enthusiasm. I've highlighted 57 systems with probable dilithium deposits that nobody's claimed, 32 with rare earth elements, signatures, and a dozen potential habitable worlds far from any major power's influence. Our Alpha Quadrant operations are just the beginning. For the first time since his return, Nolan felt a spark of his old passion ignite within him. This was something worth building. Something that created rather than destroyed. This is just the beginning, Elara continued. There's more, much more. Nolan turned to her, seeing not just his faithful companion of centuries, but a brilliant mind with visions of her own. Show me, he said simply. As Elara began to explain her discoveries, her theories, her dreams for what they might build together, Nolan felt something settle within him. Not peace, exactly. Not purpose either, but connection. The weight of his past remained, a burden he would carry always. But perhaps, with Elara, he could carry that weight with every step. Perhaps he could become something more than the weapon he had been made to be.